Hi, my name is Barrington Miller, Director of Issuer Engagement at the Canadian Securities Exchange. And today I'm here with Beau Whitney from Whitney Economics. And this is part of the canon for the Cannabis Investor Series. And I wanted to talk to Beau because one, he's a really nice guy, but two, I find what he does fascinating. Beau, please tell the people what it is you do, where you're from, a little bit about your background, and why you're here.
Yeah, sure. So Whitney Economics provides cannabis-centric economic data analysis and consulting services to folks in this space, either on the adult use and medical side or on the hemp side. And we have a global clientele. And basically what we do is there's so little data out there that's really reliable. So my firm goes out, tracks down what's good, what's bad, vets it, and then we produce customized reports, some general reports and the like, and we offer that as a service to the cannabis industry. And we're based out of Portland, Oregon. Portland is one of the meccas of cannabis, going back generations. And I just happened to enter into the space about 8 years ago, just by random chance. I was teaching an economics course at the university level, and a student mentioned the cannabis industry, and it piqued my curiosity. And the rest is kind of history. I do have experience in the cannabis industry. I was the COO of a cannabis-related company that had ownership in Canada, but operations in the U.S. And we were fortunate enough to be one of the first, if not the first, to go public on the CSE.
That is a great story, and yes, and it's all true. Let's talk about the big picture. What are you seeing globally, and then we'll sort of break it down into North America. What are you seeing globally as far as cannabis? Is the trend still this? Is it plateauing? Is it coming down?
Countries are seeing the economic opportunities associated with cannabis, and cannabis is generically defined. It could be industrial cannabis, it could be medical cannabis, it could be adult use or lifestyle cannabis. But regardless of how you define it, countries are seeing the potential of this. They're seeing it in terms of climate change. They're seeing it in terms of alternative fuels. They're seeing it in terms of a way in which to reduce healthcare expenditures, to gain access to hard currencies like in Africa. And so there's a lot of, for various reasons, a lot of these countries are seeing the economic benefits of deploying legal cannabis in their country, and the pace of that deployment is starting to accelerate. You're starting to see it on practically every continent now. And I've been fortunate enough to have access to those countries, and then I've been providing data and insights and hopefully some sound guidance to help them transition from an illegal regulatory environment to a legal one.
Now, what about a little bit closer to home, North America? We can talk. Let's talk about the U.S. and because I think we know what's going on, at least in Canada. A lot of grow ups, a lot of oversupply. I think Canada burned 468 tons of unpackaged cannabis last year in 2021, which was up 50% versus the year before. So yeah, it was over 200. This is not good. We're not heading in the right direction as far as that, and we need to rein that in.
When I first started looking into the Canadian market, this was right in the run-up towards their legalization and deployment. And you could see the writing on the wall. You could see the massive amount of planned capacity and installed capacity. And I think at that time, the Canadian firms were positioning themselves to enter into the US market in a big way. But the timing was off, unfortunately. And so all that planned capacity, all of that supply and the like, needed to go somewhere, because of course it was greater than the total amount that could be consumed in the Canadian domestic market. And so they started looking for other opportunities. And so you started seeing partnerships in South Africa, or you started seeing partnerships in Germany or in the European Union. But even with those partnerships, it wasn't enough to satisfy all of that supply and consume all that supply. And so then, unfortunately, this is kind of what is happening now. Contrast that to the United States. I think it's a joke around the United States that for the last 8 years, cannabis federal legalization is 5 years away. And so, um,
five
so
years,
yeah,
and
everything is,
it's still 5 years away.
it's still 5 years.
It's
Yeah.
still.
And so that's been the mantra for 8 years now. And so there's, as a result of that lack of federal legalization, each state has had to deploy their individualized markets where you have to set up an entire infrastructure, the supply, the product manufacturing, the retail, the regulations, and all that. And so what I'm seeing in the United States is those that legalized early, like Oregon or Colorado or Washington, they're starting to peak. They've satisfied about as much demand as they can, unless they do something like adjust their taxation or make greater access or lower the price or what have you. But where the market is moving in the United States is more towards these emerging states that are just now starting to deploy their legal programs. So legal states such as New York, New Jersey, I mean, those just legalized and they're just starting to uh, stand up their regulatory programs, but it's going to take a while for them to really hit their stride.
No, it's we're keeping a very close eye on New York for several reasons. That seems to be the bellwether, culturally, spiritually, economically. Um, it's at the intersection, um, and
Well, you've got New York on Massachusetts and Florida on one side. Pennsylvania is a pretty enticing market as well. Once they go transition away from medical and into adult use. But don't underestimate the power of California on the West Coast.
oh
So
no
I mean, it's
no
a
trouble,
that's
no
a
problems here with
huge
Cali.
market.
No, California is actually the old New York. If you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. Um,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
and what we're seeing is it's a battle of brands almost, because now you have California brands that want to come to New York, um, but they're not trying to displace the New York brands. But the New York brands are the ones that are in control, because if they don't like you, you're done. And simple as that. And there is big time brand loyalty going on.
A majority of the supply that's produced in the United States actually comes from California. And so there's this massive export market. My firm put together a supply report that looks at legal and illicit supply. It looks at it from the canopy perspective. It looks at it from greenhouse and indoor and outdoor. So we have this really full picture of the entire supply of cannabis in the United States. And so there's this massive export market out of California that satiates the demand in New York, in Florida, and elsewhere. And it's really interesting that while California and Oregon, Colorado are really good at cultivation, on the East Coast, the real skill set there is on the distribution and retail side. And so I think ultimately, as the market matures and full federal legalization, or at least some interstate commerce is allowed, you're going to see supply from the West being distributed in the East.
And this is all a legal market. This is all gray market, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. In 2021, there was roughly $25 billion of legal sales, but that's out of about $105 billion total market. And so that 80 or so billion dollars in 2021 was satisfied through illicit or legacy channels.
No, that's the legacy market isn't going away. And I've been arguing this for a number of years now. I think the legacy market needs to stay. It needs to be that checks and balances. that keeps everyone even keel. I mean, yes, eventually down the road, but especially in California, if the taxes are too high on cannabis, then you'll see a massive turn to the gray market. Simple. I mean, that's how they were figuring out. All right, 18%? No, way too high. 10%? Okay, it's livable. 12%? Not quite. We're going back, and so I found it really really interesting.
Yeah, my firm's actually calculated the elasticity of demand. And so, consumers are willing to pay a premium to do things in the legal market, but they're just not willing to pay too much of a premium. And so they like the idea of tested goods, of relatively safe products and the like, brands and some type of control. But if the pricing differential between legal market and the illicit market is too great, if that pricing differential, then they'll just remain in the illicit market. And this is really, really predictable. I was able to actually analyze multiple states where there was a pricing change or a change in taxes and what that would do to the legal sales. And I was able to nail those numbers almost exactly. I mean, that's how predictable it is.
One of the things that we deal with at the Canadian Securities Exchange is, of course, investments and investors and people looking to get into how do I get into cannabis? And I want to get into cannabis. There's three little letters that keep popping up over the last couple of years, and they ESG. And there's a number of ESG mandates that are out there. How does ESG tie in to the multi-state operators and when valuing these multi-state operators?
Well, right now, the whole concept of ESG, environmental, social, and governance, is just starting to take off. And so I think the infrastructure is starting to be developed and promulgated, so that people can understand really what this is. But there is really compelling data out there that shows if there are firms that are environmentally conscious and have programs associated with social equity and social justice, and have a good governance, a good board that values these concepts. The data shows that these companies generally have greater success in the marketplace. And it's almost as though there's a multiplier associated with, and I haven't calculated that multiplier quite yet, but there's actually a multiplier that shows if you have ESG programs, if you're environmentally and socially aware, have good, strong governance, then it's going to benefit not only the company, but the investors and the stakeholders in that firm.
That's something that we were seeing as well. If two companies are equal and one has an ESG program and one doesn't, the one with the program will get more money, or will get money versus not getting money.
Yeah, and some of the environmental impacts of adult use and medical are pretty significant. And those are mandated by the regulators, like plastic packaging. I mean, there's just this plastic crisis, and it's horrible environmentally. But there are paths where if, adult use companies team up with plant-based plastic companies, especially in the hemp industry, then they can combine their resources and address the environmental issues while standing up both sides of the THC industry, right? So there's lots of opportunities. And I think that the industries are just, now that there's an awareness out there of ESG, now that there's a greater sensitivity towards environmental issues and social issues, I think now you're starting to see opportunities present themselves in the marketplace.
Now, is this economic data contributing to the liberalization of cannabis policy in the United States?
Well, I think right now there's been so little data in the United States at the federal level. There's there are these things called NAICS codes, North American Industrial Classification Codes, and they help track the flow of goods and services throughout the US economy. Because cannabis is federally illegal, there are really no NAICS codes. And if they are, they're very, very general in nature. And so it's very difficult to track the flow in goods and services throughout the economy. But when you do dig into the data, and that's why I have a team behind me that does this great work, and they're just very diligent in tracking this stuff down. Um, once you track that, then you can see the trends and you can see where the opportunities exist. I mentioned my supply report earlier. I had a team of analysts on at my firm look at the canopy of the legal canopy of the United States by state. And we could identify how much output is associated with that canopy and whether or not they're in a over, supply position or an undersupply position. And so what that would tell investors is, well, if you're oversupplied, prices are going to go down, margins are going to be compressed, and maybe that's not a state that you want to invest in. And so that's how we're using data to help investors and policymakers. I've given the policymakers a model that basically says, here are the number of licenses that you need in a given state to satisfy the demand at various stages of your ramp, right? So a lot of this stuff helps not only investors, be set up better for success, but it's also helping regulators do a better job of not getting into those positions in the first place.
And I want to piggyback off of the some of the data and tracking over the past, say, 7 years. What data points have shifted as our understanding of the industry has improved, as it's evolved, as it's gotten better? What was there 7 years ago that isn't, or vice versa?
Well, I think data has been used to more effectively look at public safety and serve as a tool for law enforcement, and so in that sense, there's been a little bit more control over the industry. But it's also helped assuage the fears of a lot of the opponents of cannabis legalization. For example, I've been presenting some data on crime statistics. And so while there's some evidence that shows that there may be some criminal elements, when you deploy cannabis in a community with all of the security measures, with all the cameras, crime in those areas actually goes down. And through the legal reform, the closure rate of other crimes, hard crimes, human trafficking, murder, rape, etc., the closure rate of those increases. And so that means that more hard crimes are solved. And then there's data out there to look at the impact on healthcare, opiates, the amount of opioid prescriptions, pain relief, and sales of prescription drugs associated with pain. So this data is starting to slowly enter in, become more standardized, and then it's beneficial to help articulate what the issues are associated with legalization. Are there bad things that happen? Sure. But a lot of times the people just don't understand the impact that's positive in nature. And once they see the data, then they're a little bit more open towards reform. And so that's the role that data has played and how it's evolved over time. It's just been, now that there's a larger body of work, then people are using that body of work to help address some of the questions, answer the questions through education, where, there just hasn't been data before.
I'm going to shift gears just a tiny little bit. Is there anybody who's reached out to you or tried to employ your services who I guess it would be, you just didn't see it coming, or you were completely shocked that this person, group, organization branch, government, country reached out to you, um, and that actually surprised you? Is there, has that happened?
Uh, yeah.
And that you're allowed to say.
um, you know, there's been some multinational corporations, for example, that said, "Hey, we've been following your work for a long time, and we want to engage on a deep dive analysis that's relative, that's it's important for their businesses, either through investment, through acquisition analysis, through market analysis and market entry strategies." And so I've been starting to get some of the really large multinational firms, coming on board. And that's been, whenever that happens, I give the team a call and I say, "Hey, look, folks, you made this happen. A lot of the hard work that's gone in, some folks that have been on my team for a while, they're working really hard, and I try to celebrate those successes with them because they are the backbone of the success of my firm, right? So yeah, I've been surprised. Others, um, there's been some surprises from left field as well on the negative side. Some people are, they maybe don't like the fact that I take a neutral position. I don't advocate for any set policy or anything. I just, I don't take a position on legalization or anything. And so when I do this analysis, it's sometimes it rubs people the wrong way. And so, but when people are sending both positive and negative feedback, I think I might be doing something right.
That's exactly what you want. You're right down the middle. You don't want either side to, only one side to love the report,
And there's been
because it's
instances where I've said, "Hey, look, I'm going to do this analysis, and I'll present the results as I see it based upon the data, and I'm not going to bias it for your goals. Kind of you get what you get." And for some folks, for most, almost like 99%, they're like, "Yeah, that's cool. That's just what we want." But then for some, they said, "No, no, I want you to change the messaging, or I want you to bias it, in favor of us." And I'm like, "I'm sorry, I just won't do that." And so I'm always upfront at the beginning of an engagement that says, "Hey, I'm just going to do this, and you get what you get, and you don't throw a fit," as we used to say to our children. Um,
exactly.
and and if people don't want that, then I'm happy not to engage with them, quite frankly.
Um, one of my last point, like we've talked about data and the business. Yeah, you're in the business of data. What are your competitors, peers? What are they like? Do they reach out to you? Do you talk? Do you collaborate? Do you kind of just stay in your own lanes? How does that work?
Well, I try to share my data and insights with everybody, regardless of if they're a competitor or not. I think it only strengthens the industry and strengthens the data and the narrative. And so I try to collaborate as much as possible. There's some groups that keep things behind the paywall, and I do with some of my data as well. But in generally, I'm pretty open. I think the time for that real hardcore competitive spirit, it's not quite there yet with the cannabis industry. And so we need to collaborate. And some people have specialized in other areas, and so there are some swim lanes being developed. But I tend to be more on the, here's what the data says now, and here's what it's looking like for your future. And that's kind of what's differentiating me right now. There's not a whole lot of data folks out there that makes these predictions about the future. They tend to say what happened in the past and what's going on in the current.
You wrote a paper or published a report in 2021. Do you want to, let's let's talk a little bit about that. What were some of the findings? It was one that you shared with some of the members of CSE. But
Was
yeah,
that the one on the related to the business conditions and business
yes,
sentiment?
yeah,
Yeah, a lot of there's been a lot of um, reform proposals in the US Congress. There's reforms going on internationally as well. And but there hasn't been a whole lot of, well, what does the industry say about this stuff? And so what I did is I put out a survey, a business condition survey, to as many licensed operator in the United States as I could get hold of. And we got a really overwhelming response. It was great. And now we're trying to do this every quarter. And so similar to what I contribute on into some of the mainstream economic groups that I'm a member of throughout the United States and internationally. And because business conditions, predictions, right? It's, that's what people want. What was really interesting was that in the United States, there wasn't a whole lot of profitability being gleaned from the cannabis industry. It's kind of a counter narrative. Everybody thinks that people are rolling in the dough, but in fact, they're actually struggling. And part of the struggle is operational efficiency. But a majority of the struggle is based upon federal policy. Lack of access to financial services, lack of access to stock markets, and so that's why the CSE has been so great in terms of providing that service to those that otherwise don't have access to financial services. So that's a tremendous service that you guys are providing. And it shows up in the data. It's a top concern for cannabis operators in the United States is access to financial services and banking. And then another one was just heavy taxation. And so, but this has been a narrative throughout the industry for a number of years, but there's never been any data behind it. And so that was the goal of my firm, was to go out, talk to people, get the data, roll it up, and then publish it out. So I literally gave the report out for free to anybody that really wanted it, including policymakers and including regulators and including operators and investors in the space.
Well, that's a smart play, and that's a smart way to do it. Um, Beau, I just want to say thank you. Every time we talk, I learn so much more. On behalf of the Canadian Securities Exchange, on behalf of the Cannabis Investor Series, which you can find on YouTube, CSE TV. Also check us out on social media. Uh, this has been great. Like, normally obviously we talk with our issuers, and we'll talk with lawyers and bankers and financiers and then investors, but this is an opportunity now to talk with somebody who really has a neutral position and makes decisions solely on what the data is telling you. So we really, really appreciate your insights. How can people find you? Just
Yeah. So it's whitneyeconomics.com. And you can contact me via that website. And so I get notifications when people inquire. If they have a quotation that they want, I do some expert witness testimony in legal trials. And so, attorneys will reach out, investors will reach out. And so that's really, and then I put a fair amount of data to download or to purchase on the site. But then I have a lot more behind the scenes that's available as well. So really the best way is just to engage on the website. I'll give you a call, or part of my team will give you a call, and then we'll just go from there.
I've been your host, Barrington Miller, from the Canadian Securities Exchange, and I was with Beau Whitney, founder of Whitney Economics.